Beautiful.
Got it. Thank you, Michelle. So happy to be here with Gainesville GNV. It's not that anymore. It's the UX Generalist Alliance, which is very cool. I think it broadens the scope of who we can talk to, and I think that's really wonderful. A couple of really quick things before I start the video. I do want to let everybody know I'm no longer the UX director at Poetic. We live in a crazy world and things change all the time, and I'm here to meet that. However, I did put together a lot of thoughts about minimum viable product, and I promise I get to the answer about why I say the Agile Manifesto is wrong. But it does take a minute, so lean into it, I think. And since I am recording, I can be participating in the chat as well if the questions come up or topics. And I probably don't want to try to answer the questions hard in the chat, but if I have some knowledge that I can share or a link to information, I did notice I mentioned the Agile Manifesto I thought was written in the 80s. It was written in 2001. So I make some mistakes and I'll probably make those corrections in the chat, so pay attention for that. Okay, so with that said, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Okay, can everybody see the play button on the screen? Okay.
Yes, we can.
See how this works. Hi there, my name is Scott Purcell, and I am a user experience designer / product designer with 14 years of experience. And today I want to talk about building minimum lovable products, what that means, how you might go about doing that, or at least how I've been kind of approaching it, and the information that I've found about lovability, and why I think it's so important to even talk about. So to get started, let's go ahead and take a look at what minimum lovable products are. To start off with, minimum lovable products means lean. It means a lean process. In other words, doing exactly the minimum amount of work that you have to do to get to the next step. And not pre-describing that process so much, although there are some steps inside of this that I think we can all agree in as user experience practitioners, that, you know, you collect information at the beginning of, you collect as much information as you can at the beginning of a project or a product development, cycle, and then you learn as much as you can, and then you move that information into synthesizing. I call it two things: context mapping and rapid prototyping. But all of that is not necessary for minimum lovable products, in that what I mean by that is that minimum lovable products are simply a different mindset. It's about changing the mindset in how we're building products. And I think it's really valuable in this day and age, and I'll tell you why in just a second, but just to understand what minimum lovable product is, and in comparison to a minimum viable product, which you've probably heard about in the past, and I'm sure you've probably heard about minimum lovable product too. But the big thing is that it is lean. It keeps the work that we do focused, and that's really, really important for cost savings, for mental health. I mean, sometimes people can go off and do an extraordinary amount of front-end work for a product that isn't necessary, and or one of the big challenges I think here is scope. A lot of times there's a lot of things that we're trying to solve all at the same time. So minimum really just means about doing something very focused and understanding what the first step is and moving on to the next. You know, lovability is interesting. There's actually there's a book out called Lovability, and I can't remember the author, but if you click on one of these two links down here, his name is Brian. I can't remember his last name, but if you click on one of these two links down here, you can get kind of a sense of, he's the one who wrote a lot of this information that I'm sharing today. But a minimum viable product is based on validation in the market. It's taking a wild guess, a wild leap, going and doing the work to build that and putting it into the market and testing it. Versus what a lovable product would do is it differentiates value. It knows enough about the user up front that we're making educated guesses on what goes into the market. MVPs, for example, minimum viable products, do not take some significant time to understand the problem. And I think one of the things about minimum lovable products is we do enough work to understand what the problem is a little bit better. And I'll give you a couple methods on that, jumping in ahead. And then taking here the 10 building blocks of lovability. Again, this is Brian's concept here. I think it's really important to say utility, growth, and inspiration. Another way that I think about this is usability, right? So a product can be in the market and it can be usable, but it isn't necessarily desirable. And so I say usability is, is the stepping stone to desirability, and then desirability is the stepping stone to lovability. The way Brian kind of breaks this down in his book is more about utility, growth, and inspiration. And it's really good because it's a little bit of a mindset change. And I'll tell you a little bit about why we need a mindset change when we're thinking about this in just a minute. But getting to the next point here, why? Why should we be doing minimum lovable products? Well, this is a Forrester survey that was done, I think it was in 2007 or 2017, 2018. And it did a survey of what users thought of current products that were in the market. And you'll see here in this graph, most people thought the products were just okay. They're just a little bit, okay, but this is sort of old data. What's happening now? Well, we made some progress in 2021. The state of user experience, or the state of a person's experience with product. We made some progress, but there was a significant fall off in 2022 where businesses weren't prioritizing the user's experience as much as they were in 2020. And there's a link here for the Forrester report, although the report is paywalled. So just giving you a heads up. But really it's important to understand that we really haven't grown that much. So the graph here is from 2016, 2017. And really hasn't changed very much. What I would say is that okay is a column for usability, good is a column for desirability, and excellent is a column for lovability. So kind of just thinking in those terms, why do we need that? Why is that important? Well, obviously, we all believe that user experience has a high return on investment. In fact, I think the current data on that, and I couldn't find it in time for this chat, but I think the current data on that particular is 1 to 1, so 100% return on investment, which is pretty extraordinary. And I think it even can go beyond, but there are different metrics on all of that. But let's move into the next thought here, where Brian talks about, and you can watch this video here if you want to, where you kind of learn about his thinking behind lovability. But here's a kind of a look here of 2018 consumer survey And there's a lot of drop off for emotion, right? There's within these different verticals or these different domains, airlines, insurance, auto, direct banking, multi-channel banks, growth management or wealth management, I should say, digital retail, multi-channel retail. My point here is that you can see we're all hovering, all of these industries are hovering around 70 in the index scale, which is 70 out of 100 is probably closer to desirable. These products are desirable, whereas the 70 to 60 range might be closer to usable or usability. There's some usability to it, and that's fine. I like to think about this in terms of paying my bills, right? So I don't want to pay my bills. I mean, I do. It's a necessary activity that's required for all of us that are adults and humans. But it's not something that I particularly want to do. And taking me through the process of paying my bill is even more painful if, let's say, for example, I have to look at my account number for my utility, or I have to look at my password, or I have to type in the amount that I want to pay versus just understanding, or even I have to continue doing it every month. And maybe I only need to set up an automatic payment. And then some utility companies have the ability to be able to do that, some don't. But I wouldn't say it's a particularly enjoyable experience setting that up. But there could be some lovability in doing that kind of paying your bill online, whether it's a utility bill, a credit card statement, different, Netflix. I mean, obviously I like paying for Netflix over electricity, but if I don't have electricity, then I can't have my Netflix. But anyway, my point here is that you'll see the emotions are pretty low. I mean, people aren't loving the products that they're interacting with. It's not giving them the needs or the love that they want. And that turns into profitability. Now, what's the difference between desirability and lovability? Well, here's an example. This is from a product that I built in 2018 called NICEX. And I built a rapid prototype for this where I learned these kinds of things. And this is what we want, right? This is the desired outcome. The current state of affairs is that we're about a 70. As an industry-wide user experience, we're about at a 70, in terms of desirability, but we're not quite up to the level of lovability. And I've written it out here: lovability over desirability over utility. So looking at this, this quote that Carl Varner made, he's the VP of logistics, about the product he works with called NICEX. He says, "I like NICEX because it's effective and user-friendly. Just the dynamics of the software itself. You can tell that it is ultra-intuitive. It was designed by people who understand shipping, who speak our language, and I love everything about it." Now, that is a lovability statement. That's the desired, that's the lovable state that we want to get to. You notice I corrected myself because I think we use the term current state and desired state pretty often. I'd love to pivot our mindset on that and say current state versus the lovable state. And this is an example of a lovable state. Carl loves the product. He loves the software. He's happy to use it. And he enjoys it. It gives him an enjoyment in his role. Now, this is a business-to-business application, but the same could be applied to a business-to-consumer application of B2C. But in general, Carl loves this. And this is the outcome that we really, really want, right? This is what we're kind of trying to get to with lovability versus desirability versus utility. So there's some challenges, in our industry. There's plenty of challenges in our industry, to be honest with you. In fact, siloed thinking is a big part of what we're dealing with. And what I said, the statement that I made about Agile Manifesto being wrong, I'll get to that. But siloed thinking is a big part of it. People culture, we're going through this huge transition about moving people to be remote workers versus hybrid workers versus in-person working. And all of that has an impact on our ability to deliver lovability. Another big challenge is feature development. And what that means is that user experience teams or designers tend to have to be micro-focused on feature building rather than understanding the big wide picture. Why are they building this feature? What problem is it solving for the business? What problem is it solving for the user? Another big thing that is kind of a challenge in our current time is scoping. In that scoping, we tend to kind of boil the ocean or eat the entire elephant all at once. And there are some methods and techniques that you can do to kind of boil down scoping. And it mostly revolves around data sets and the types of data sets that we're working with. Or in some cases, I think people refer to it as use cases, right? So I've got a use case that says, user needs to do X, Y, and Z because ABC. And then the challenge with the scoping of X, Y, and Z is that it's so huge and there's 20 users that it affects and which leads me to another point here. Market segment understanding. There's actually a really good documentation from SAFE called, and it's part of their customer centricity. And it breaks it down into 4 types. But instead of going into all of that at this very moment, the 4 types of products that exist on the market or market segments that exist are general. And then the other one that I think about a lot is deep and narrow. Deep and narrow gets us into solving particular challenges for a specific user versus general market segments that are solving challenges for large groups of people. And that's important. It is absolutely important that we solve challenges for large groups of people all at the same time. And I think when we're paying our bills, that's kind of what we're doing. The software that I use to pay my bill or the application that I use to pay my bill online doesn't care if I can't afford it. It doesn't care that I can't afford my bill. But a deep and narrow software would say, you know what? I recognize you as a person who is having challenges making payments. And so what I would like to do is offer you a payment program or a payment delay or something along those lines. But anyway, my point here is that there are multiple market segments. There's general, specific, deep and narrow, and then some other things. So that's really good to know about. And you can find out more information about the different types of markets. So there's only 4, and it's really good because you can help your clients or your customers or your leaders understand what you're trying to build. Because sometimes they go too deep when you're trying to be general, and they go too general when you're trying to be deep. So it's really important upfront to define what market segment you're trying to do, and you can find that information on Agile, SAFE, customer centricity. Just Google it. Scalability is a big issue. Architecture and being able to continue the infrastructure when you discover new information and being able to pivot based off that information and being able to change is a big challenge. Sustainability is a big challenge within our industry, especially because it costs money for us to keep doing. And we need to build things that are focused in the beginning to get to it. But okay, so I've complained a lot with the challenges, but let me get to the opportunities here, because the number one thing I want to tell you about today is measuring lovability. And there's a way to do that, and I'll share that with you in just a moment. But what the big issue here is with the Agile Manifesto. The Agile Manifesto was written several years ago, over 25 years. I didn't look up the exact thing. I think it was in the 80s that this came out of a conference that the developers had on trying to build it. But one of the things that they say specifically is working software is the primary measure of progress. And maybe at the time that was true because we weren't putting out working software. It wasn't common for us to put out working software, but today we put out working software left and right. It is normal and common. The measurement of success, the primary measurement of progress, is no longer just putting products into the market. The measure of success is whether or not that product in the market is lovable. And that's the big thing that I take issue with the Agile Manifesto. Also, I want to point this out too, because it was built for developers. And that's something that us design op teams, design op thinkers need to think about, is that Agile was developed for development teams. You can even see here, delivering software frequently from a couple of weeks to a couple of months with business people and developers must work together daily throughout the project. Our highest priority is to satisfy the customer, which is a good point, right? Our highest priority is to satisfy the customer. But you'll notice that it does a little flip-flop. It contradicts itself by saying that the highest priority is to satisfy the customer through earliest and continuous delivery of valuable software, but then it says that the highest measure of success or progress is working software in the market. And so that's what I mean by the Agile Manifesto being wrong. It's a little contradictory. And I mean, the tenets of the major components of Agile Manifesto are still right, but the principles behind the Agile Manifesto really haven't evolved over time, and they need to. And just kind of like pinging off of that, I said, so I'm saying that working software is no longer the primary measure. What I believe is the primary measure of progress is the lovability of working software. And we can do this. I think actually most of us have been through a course about journey mapping or understand journey mapping. But I think journey mapping is the opportunity that we, number one, have to be able to build minimum lovable products. And what I've done here is I've made the process of minimum lovable product journey mapping into a lean process, which is really, really hard, because if you've seen journey mapping, you can see it be long, it can be draining, it can be complicated, it's a pain point for a lot. So what I wanted to bring to the surface today, at the very minimum, is lean journey mapping. And what I've done here is I've given you 3 major categories: before, during, and after. And then I've also given you 3 major categories for whatever user you're journey mapping for, whatever role, whatever actor, whatever customer segment that you're working with. I prefer not to use the word persona, because I also think persona has a lot of overhead, but you can take a persona and put it in here and define the scenario related to that. But the 3 things that matter in trying to empathize with the user or understand the user's journey through a product is the before, during, and after, and what they're thinking, doing, or saying. So this is a lean version of journey mapping. It can be done. You don't have to fill in all of these spots, right? And I'm just sharing this with you because it's been working for me. But one of the big things I want to point out here too is that not just, lean indicators. Okay, so I've got these 3 sets here. You could also go a little bit deeper into said, did, thought, and felt, which is another really good like generic general statement to get the juices flowing about a particular product. But the scope here, this is where you want to scope, right? You want to narrow this down to a particular type of person doing a particular type of action, and build a product around what would be lovable for this person, or this type of person that's representative of the people who use your application. So there's a couple extra little things here that I added: channels, opportunities, gaps. I find these be really helpful. And once I've gotten these, this metrics filled out with the before, during, after, thinking, doing, and saying, I found that the metrics here for this is really useful. Channels, opportunities, gaps. But when it comes to measuring lovability, you want to focus on identifying leading indicators. And leading indicators are going to be a conversion from before to during column, right? So how many people did you have that were experiencing before symptoms that moved into the during symptom, that moved into the after symptom, or the after phase, whatever you want to call it? But these are the things that are happening within the user. And what are the leading indicators that tell us whether or not that user has been successful? So when it comes to measuring lovability, the point that I'm trying to make here is that lean journey mapping makes it small and manageable for you to move into the next phase. Now, I just wanted to kind of share with you real quick. There's different lenses that you can look at this from. And by the way, I want to say this too. HubSpot is a really, really good tool out there. They've got some great some great YouTube videos about what journey mapping can look like. I still think it's a little bit more complicated. They do break theirs down into very specific phases, and sometimes that's appropriate, sometimes it's not.
That's cool.
But I do think the thinking, doing, saying, and in addition, the channels is a big part, the opportunities, the gaps, and the leading indicators really does matter. But when you're doing this type of work, if you don't have access to the end user to help you answer the questions about thinking, doing, and saying, a really lean way to do this is to get the feedback from all of these different people: marketing, sales, technology, supporting systems, third-party integration, support, policies. These types of groups are pretty much the way to go. So taking a look back here, there are a couple of things that, so I really wanted to make sure that I covered measuring lovability. And if we recap what that means, measuring lovability is completing a journey map and understanding the conversion from phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 3. And that's the way to say lovability, how lovable your product will be. So stepping beyond desirability and moving into the lovability phase. So outcome-based planning is another one that would be really great. Behavior change, is another topic that, really needs to be talked about, because a lot of times what we're doing, again, like I said, is focusing on feature development, micro-focused feature development. And really what we should be focusing on as teams is how do we change the behavior from the current state to the desired state or the lovable state. Lean journey mapping, which I kind of told you a little bit about. Lean UX Canvas is a really big help. I do this all the time. It's available out there. Jeff Gotham and Jeff Seaton, who wrote the book on lean user experience, have the lean UX Canvas. And actually Jeff Seaton is the one who turned me on to journey mapping and means of measurement for the conversion and or the outcome-based planning, orienting teams to build products that are measurably lovable. So yeah, anyway, it's a convergence of lean user experience by Jeff, lovability by Brian, Journey Mapping by Jeff Seaton. So all of that coming together and kind of trying to share that with you through here. But one of the big things I think, the big takeaways is that if you're working in a organization that operates as an agile organization, there are a lot of things that are preventing you from being able to practice lovability. And these tools that I've mentioned here, measuring lovability, outcome-based, planning, behavior change, journey mapping, the UX Canvas, design ops are all really great opportunities for us to step forward into the next phase of user experience where we're really improving how the user feels about our product. That we get them to that excellent level and stepping up our abilities to provide value to the business, value to the user. And yeah, so that's my talk today. I hope you enjoyed it. And hopefully you've asked questions. If you haven't, that's okay. You can always PM me on LinkedIn. But just to one last thing, I do have a type form questionnaire that I'd like to share with you all and get some feedback on this particular talk. So I'll provide that link to you. And if you could answer those questions and provide me that data, I'd really appreciate it. Really trying to get to the heart of what's lovable. How can we build quickly, keep up with the market pace, because we all know that the market pace is super fast. And how can we build products that are meaningful for people? I'll tell you, I wake up in the morning with the excitement of building products for people's lives that make a difference, that make their lives better. And that is a motivator for me. I hope it's a motivator for you. Of course, money matters too, but I definitely lean towards building lovability over profitability. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on some of these subjects and what maybe I could do a little bit better. And thank you for joining.
Fantastic. Thank you, Scott.
Yeah, hope everybody enjoyed it. I'm going to put the link to the type form now that I have access to that screen again. Some of the links I wanted to share I didn't have access to, and I was DMing Michelle during some of those. So, just a correction, Agile Manifesto was not built in the 80s, it was 2001. So yeah.
Which is still 21 years ago, which is insane.
I was thinking 20 years and for some reason, because I said 20 years.
You're not wrong.
Years, and then I went 1980, who knows? Sometimes my mind just goes all over the place.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'd love to open the floor to questions, or if that's right for you, Michelle. That's the next step.
That sounds great. Yeah, I'll just kick us off that I definitely align to your concept of, the money is nice, but the thing that I enjoy is making products that actually make a difference in people's lives. And so often when we're working for, I work in an agency, so working in something that I'm typically working with, large corporations, it can feel a little soulless sometimes. So I really like this concept of the MLP. I've had one client that Brittany may have heard about this one because her husband worked with me, is the MAP, minimum awesome product, which was a whole nother level, but definitely was too far. So I really like this definition. I thought that was pretty cool.
I want to touch on something that you mentioned. And thanks. I'm glad that you valued it. I was trying to mix the things that I think we mostly all know already with some resources that are out there to help us kind of get past sort of this like mediocre, world that we live in. But the other thing I would say is, and I mean this when I say this, I wake up in the morning excited about building products for people that people will love. And somewhere in my career, probably about 5 or 6 years ago, I fell out of love with user experience. And one of the reasons why is because I didn't understand this. I didn't understand this about myself, that I like getting up in the morning and thinking about how I'm going to make somebody else's world a better place. Even if it's a small piece of work. So I kind of have globbed onto minimum lovable products for a long time. When I worked at a company a few years ago, it was very development oriented. Minimum viable product was the lingo, MVP. And what I found is that if I changed the mindset just a smidge to be lovability, then it really changed people's engagement and their excitement and motivation about working on it. Because no longer were they just building the functionality or the features that were defined in the roadmap. They were making a difference in people's lives. And that's not just true for UX designers, because our developer counterparts, our project managers, our leaders, our CEOs, they all want the same thing, where they're building products that are meaningful and valuable for the end user at the end of the day. Now, I will say, I will make a caveat of that though too. Sometimes there are people out there that are just in it for the money. And that happens too. And you'll know that at a certain point in time in your career. I'm sure all of us have been involved and will experience that, but anyway, that's my point is that it's very lovable. Not only is it lovable on the side of the user, but it's lovable on the teams that are building lovable products.
So I'd love to kick us off with a question. As I said, work in an agency, and so we do a lot of work really across the product life cycle, right? So everything from generating the idea, understanding the problems faced, designing out a solution, evaluating that, developing it, et cetera, marketing it. I'm curious, I think, the idea of MLP can be incorporated throughout that process, but when it comes to testing it and evaluating, are we making a lovable product? Are you mostly focusing that in development? Are you doing that design? Kind of where does that fall? How does that work in your life cycle?
Yeah, and so I definitely, when I made this presentation, I focused a lot of energy on the upfront work, because I think that's one of the barriers to leaders allowing us to do the full end-to-end process. Is that they are afraid of the cost involved in doing an in-depth persona, doing an in-depth journey mapping, doing those kinds of things. So really a lot of what I talked about today was the front end side of it, versus when a product gets to market and testing, or even before it gets to market and user testing. And I definitely am an advocate for that as well. But it isn't something that I talked a lot about today in terms of the minimum viable product. But there are methods as well that I lean on heavily. And I'm sure, Michelle, because you do this type of work too, I'm sure you'll have your own tips, of things that you've learned over time that have worked really well. For me, a couple of things that have worked well and that I continue to use, I call it the 4 L's. However, I will, with the caveat that I've changed the 4 L's from being the retrospective version to being the user testing version, which is the liked, loved, lacked, and longed for. And it's a little different than the retrospective version. It works the same way. But I like to get, because a lot of times what happens when we put a product in front of a user is we end up asking them what they don't like, or what doesn't work, or what doesn't blah, 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 and what we need to also do in a balanced method is ask them what they love and what they like, because that can give us just as equal amount of insight into what we should do next as the pain points that they might be feeling. And putting that in context, this is the other part. So that's I always have to do this quantitative and qualitative. Quantitative means, the information, and qualitative, qualitative, because qualitative means that it's measurements, right? So did I say that right, Michelle? Yeah, let me if I said
Quant
it
is the quantity, so the number. qual is the quality.
That's what I'm looking for. Thank you. And I know these things, it just, being on the spot,
You always get mixed
I
up.
have to do my, like, you know how you have to choose your left hand? I have to remind yourself every time. But anyway, you know, when it comes to getting to what the users are experiencing, the 4Ls is a really great way to do that. On the opposite side of that, getting measurements for that data is what I like to use is the Likert scale. And that's the 1 through 5, 1 being least and 5 being most. And that kind of gives me a gauge. And you'll notice too, so I like to ask questions with the 1 to 5 rating. And by the way, I did put a link in the chat box asking folks to fill out the type form for me, which is just a little bit of helping me understand how valuable this knowledge is for folks, and trying to kind of get to a point where maybe I can use this in a different way, or you know, focus on the things that people really need. But you'll notice in that type form, I use the Likert scale 1 through 5, and that really gives a quantifiable way. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, quantifiable way. I can say it right when I don't mean to, but then I have to think about it. Anyway, quantifiable way to say exactly what matters, and putting that priority on the data that we gather from that type of thing. You'll notice that the 1 through 5 scale falls in the same as the research that was done by Forrester in the presentation. 1 being, you know, customers didn't appreciate the product, versus 5 being people loved the product. And so in a way, it's sort of a net promoter score, but it's what I like to call it as a leading indicator to what will happen when the product reaches the market. So I think that it's really important to answer your question and get back on topic. I did want to share those 2 things. Likert scale and the 4Ls are my go-to lean tools. But to get back to your question, you know, a lot of what I talked about today was on the front end. There's tools on the back end too, like 4Ls and Likert scale that I tell people I think it's really important and valuable. All right, don't be shy. I'm going to pick somebody if I don't hear anything in a minute. I'm going to pick somebody and ask them what they thought.
I have one more question.
Yeah, go for it, Michelle.
So as I mentioned, you know, we've done this minimum awesome product thing before, and it just ended up with a lot of bloat, like, because, and I think you kind of mentioned this, everybody kind of has their own definition of what that should be. And, you know, even we tried to focus on something along the lines of minimum lovable product, where we're really focusing on not just like the bare bones, but what would make it enjoyable. But again, it's so subjective. It was really hard to know how to scope it. And I don't know, I know you talked a little bit about this in your talk, but I was wondering if you could maybe recap, or if there's some specific exercises that you do to help people better define what should be in that MLP, as opposed to, you know, blowing the whole thing up.
Yeah, 2 things that come to mind off the top of my head, and so help me stick to these 2 thoughts. First of all, I had a customer who wanted a spinning globe, and he had tested this with a lot of his investors before, and the spinning globe would be able, you know, the user would be able to interact with the spinning globe, and they would see how their investment in one location had impacted another location, and this was this cool interactive way for them to do it. And his investors found that it was absolutely lovable, and it was one of the reasons why his investors wanted to put money into his project, because he had a spinning globe, and that was cool. And so what I would say there is that's a really bad example of how lovability can go completely wrong. And because really the truth is that seeing a geographical location of an investment is far less useful than seeing the return on investment. So we're comparing two things, geography versus return on investment. So at the end of the day, that as investors really don't want to see geography. That as investors want to see how how their ROI has worked out. Here's what I would say. Short answer is make that case. And at the end of the day, the client's always right. And get your ego out of the way too. That's the other thing. I mean, that's, not the second thing I wanted to talk about, but, maybe you're wrong, maybe what investors really do want to say, not you specifically. Yeah. I don't mean to project, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe users do want to see a spinning globe and it is really cool. And hey, if it ends up getting his investors to buy in, then have we really lost the effort of going through the lovability aspect, and then somewhere down the line having a real hard conversation about what's really needed? Because I think those user stories, those end users are going to start telling you, what, the globe is nice, but what I really need is whatever. I think in that spot too, I think I always find a fight to be had with graphical representation of data. What I mean by that is data visualizations. I think, and I'm a person in my own space. I think that data visualizations are the challenge that we face most of the time. When we talk about the car dashboard, and I mentioned this in our breakout group, when we talk about the car dashboard, we look at the speedometer, and it's a visual representation of our speed. We have to use cognitive processes to figure out what speed we go if that speedometer is this. Now, if it's a digital speedometer, it tells us we're going 55 miles per hour, 55.2 miles per hour, as a matter of fact. So it's so much more accurate to see the digital version of information than data representation of information. And I would argue that this is a case where, in this particular example where he wants to see a spinning globe, we live in a digital world, and we've got to move our mindset from being these physical objects into these digital objects that are more meaningful to users at the end of the day. So I'll get off my soapbox about data visualizations. The second thing I wanted to say here is outcome-based planning. And I hit on it a little bit. And so there's a lot to outcome-based planning, and I wouldn't do it justice by stumbling over it too much right now. But I think to answer the second part of your question, I think outcome-based planning will help mitigate some of those challenges where the client wants to go, or client or leaders or whomever, subject matter experts sometimes take you off the rails. Sometimes product owners take you off the rails. Who knows? But I would say to you that if we're focused on outcome-based planning and we're enabling teams to make decisions that are best bet, and trusting experts who understand how data visualizations can have an impact versus digital visualizations, I think that's where kind of saying, here's what I expect if you produce on this. I don't care whether it's a data visualization and I don't care whether or not it's a digital representation. Do what's right for the outcome that I'm trying to achieve. And included in that outcome that I'm trying to achieve should be lovability.
Thank
you. Okay, all of you guys that are on mute, I'm going to go, and I hope that, look, I'm not trying to test you. But I would love to hear what you think. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let's make this a discussion. I know I talked at everybody for a long time. This is your opportunity to talk back at me. Roland? I feel like I'm Ferris Buellering. Roland? Bueller? Hey, Roland, what's your thoughts? Okay, Rachel, what's your thoughts?
Hi.
Hi,
Hey.
Rachel.
Hi. Okay, so I thought this was very interesting and super helpful. I'm so new to UX that like a lot of the things that we're talking about, I'm like you know, just now learning and appreciating. So thank you. Um, but I guess my main question that I had talking about like agile organizations, how would you persuade someone that's really just looking to make a minimum viable product? How would you persuade them that the best course of action is actually to create a minimal lovable product and spend more time upfront journey mapping and all of that?
Yeah, thank you. Good question. Really good question, actually. And so number one um, would be that, and I'll form my thought here, but it's number one would be, loyalty. Um, most of the people who you're probably arguing with are going to be from the market space, the marketing area. They're going to have a perspective on what we should build. And they're absolutely right, because they're basing their information off of, feedback that's coming at them. But what really is meaningful here is that lovability leads to more viability than a mediocre product or something along those lines. So when they're talking about a minimum viable product versus a minimum lovable product, what I would focus on is that you can make that person more money by doing that. And now, one thing that I will say is this is one of the reasons why I wanted to offer lean alternatives to some of these things like journey mapping or understanding the business problem with lean UX canvas or, outcome-based planning and things like that. Is the reason I want to give you these lean tools is because you don't have to spend hours upon hours upon hours to go off and do this work to make a case. You can spend an hour, focus your energy on doing a lean journey mapping canvas and take that to the person that you're trying to convince and say, look, if we do X, Y, and Z, we can measure how successful we're going to be. Versus if we don't do X, Y, and Z, and we do something else altogether, we don't have a measurement to say whether or not we're being successful. And wouldn't you want to choose something that's uncertain, absolutely with certainty, a measure of success versus something that is unknown? Does that make sense? Yeah. Thank you for your question. I really appreciate it. And I apologize for putting you on the spot, but I appreciate the fact that you had something ready to go. Is there any follow-ups that you have about that? Or, and I know you said you're new to this. By the way, welcome to the practice.
Thank you. I guess my other question is like, how often do you build something that you feel like might not be lovable? Or like, how often do you have to kind of back into that corner?
Yeah, so good question. I think that I'm backed into that corner every single minute of every single day. I think I'm really honestly fighting that good fight, every single day. And it really is a matter of profitability versus lovability, right? Because you're going to deal with people who at the end of the day, they're going to choose to do what's the most profitable. And honestly, sometimes that's appropriate. I had a client once who decided they didn't want to do product improvements. They wanted to do new market share. In other words, they want to take the product that they already have and they wanted to replicate it in different domains so that they can capture new market share. That's a reasonable excuse not to do product improvements, because you focused 100% of your efforts on duplicating that in markets versus versus spending the time and energy it takes to do improvements. Now, I'd argue that there's some capacity to continuously improve even in duplication of marketing, marketing efforts. But needless to say, I think that there are some cases where, it's not the right thing. Minimum lovable product isn't the right purpose at this time. I will say this, that it tends to be in a lot of venture capitalist spaces. And that is typically where, there's an investor on the line who is going to drop off, and we're all going to lose a bunch of money if we don't do what they say. So I get it, at the end of the day, maybe this is why I've lost my job twice this year. Yeah, I get it. But also I'm going to continue personally, because I know my purpose. I know when I wake up in the morning, I'm happiest when I do work that has meaningful impact on people's lives. So, and this is kind of spiritual, I know that I'm going to continue to press that conversation in every space that I go to, and continue to offer an alternative to this that, maybe isn't the norm, or maybe isn't the direction the company is going, or something like that. For me, it's exciting to be on the edge of the work that we're doing, and trying to be in the places where the finances allow us to do the type of work that is the most meaningful. It's a high risk, high reward. But in these medium spaces, I still think there's an opportunity to embolden lovability, right? And I think that's, and maybe you don't take it as to an extreme as I do. Maybe you take it to a lower level of interest.
So we're just about at the end of our time. So let's do see if there's one more question, and if not, we will go ahead and wrap up. Carrie, I saw you came up mute. Did you have anything you wanted to ask?
I did, but I completely forgot what I was going to ask.
Oh no.
That happens a lot.
Can appreciate
I'm just
that.
going to blame it on my 30s. But yeah, no, this is really good. And I also just was laid off last week, actually, from my UX researcher position. And I feel like a lot of that had to do with the fact that the company, it was a struggle with the team I was on. It was a struggle to get them to see
The value.
the value of UX research, because it was very dev centered, and they had basically a product that they were like, hey, this is a cool idea. Let's spend 2 years and $2 million on this. And then their finances started to crash, and it's like, oh, nobody actually wants to use this product, or they don't really care. Oops. Which is what I was saying at the very beginning of my time there, was what kind of discovery research did you do how did you come about this decision, other than someone saying this is a cool idea? So yeah.
Yeah, I emphasize the research at the, like I said, in this particular talk, I wanted to emphasize the research part of it, because I think it can be minimal. I think that it cannot cost a lot of money to do. It can be fast. And I think that, and by the way, I'll say this too, it's true in UI design as it is in research, in that the smaller, more consumable the information, the easier it is to do something about, right? So the same thing in UI, where when it's intuitive, when the UI is intuitive, it's easier to do something with it. So keep it lean, keep it focused, keep the work, narrow in its vision, so that when you share the information, it makes sense to people. Because I understand what you're saying too. Go off and do a bunch of research, bring it back, and everybody's gonna be like, I don't understand anything. So Yeah, this is hard to synthesize, right? This information is hard for us to synthesize as a team. We're developers, we don't think like that. And you're asking us to think about that, and it doesn't make sense. So,
Mhm.
so honestly, I genuinely believe that Lean is a very helpful tool in trying to figure out how to distill that information in small chunks so that it's usable.
Mhm.
Also, I think we're at time, but I'm so glad to meet you all. I hope you've had a chance to fill out the type form that I shared with you. There's some resources on the Miro board that I shared, so feel free to click into there. And I'm going to continue to, I may continue to update it. Yeah, so thank you so much for everybody letting me talk your ear off. Very passionate about the subject. And if you ever need anything, feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn. Okay.
Thank you so much, Scott. And I definitely encourage everybody to join us on Slack. And as a reminder, our recordings will be available on our YouTube channel, which should be the UX Alliance. That is the wrong slide. UX Generalist Alliance YouTube channel. So keep an eye out there. As a heads up, we will not be having a meetup in January because of the holidays. So we will see, hopefully, you guys back in February. So everybody have a great and safe holiday season. We will see you in 2023. Bye, guys.